I'm Liz Faublas, and this is Currents. Pope Francis is changing the Catholic Church, and tonight we have two major developments to report. On the same day, the Holy Father is meeting for the first time with the Cardinals, who will help him reshape the Church. Italy's largest newspaper is publishing another papal interview. Under the front page banner headline, How the Church Will Change, the Pope tells La Repubblica newspaper the most serious of the evils that afflict the world these days are youth unemployment and the loneliness of the old. The old need care and companionship, and the young need work and hope. And both, the Pope says, are being crushed by the present, creating the most urgent problem that the Church is facing. The solution, according to the Pope, is a missionary church that is full of love. Francis granted the interview to Eugenio Scalfari, one of the newspaper's founders and an atheist. The Pope wrote him a letter in September stating that God's mercy is without limits. In the new interview, Mr. Scalfari asks if love for others is the only way to love God. The Pope says loving all of God's children as we love ourselves is the way to salvation. But the Pope cautions against self-love becoming excessive. That's narcissism, he says, and not good. There are some in the Church who are narcissists, and the Pope calls that kind of behavior, quote, the leprosy of the papacy. The result is a Vatican that is centered on itself and not the world around it. The Pope is emphatic when he says, I'll do everything I can to change it. The Holy Father says the Church should once again become a community of God's people where priests, pastors, and bishops are at the service of the people of God. Francis wants a church that is poor among the poor, that includes the excluded, and that preaches peace. The Pope says the Church must restore hope to young people, help the old, be open to the future, and, of course, spread love. As the Pope's interview was hitting the newsstands, Francis was gathering together his special group of cardinals, officially known as the Council of Cardinals. They are 8 church leaders selected by the Pope himself from every part of the world. The members of the council will help the Holy Father implement the changes and reforms he has in mind. Today's meeting, the first of a 3-day session, is being held in the library of the papal apartments at the Vatican. They're living with Francis at Santa Marta House and will go with him to Assisi on Friday. Before today's session got underway, the Pope and the Cardinals celebrated Mass at the Santa Marta Chapel. The Holy Father's homily included one theme found in his interview. The Church will grow if it becomes a welcoming home and gives witness to what is good.
E quando la gente, I popoli, vedono questa testimonianza di umiltà, di mitezza, di mansuetudine, sentono il bisogno che dice il profeta Zaccaria, vogliamo venire con voi.
All right, standing by right now in Rome is Father John Cush. He's a frequent Currents contributor. He is back in the Eternal City completing his church studies. We turn to him now to help us better understand what the Holy Father is just trying to achieve with the changes that he is undertaking. Father Cush, in the newspaper interview, Eugenio Scalfari asked the Pope which saints he felt closest to. Now, the Holy Father responded, St. Paul, Augustine, Benedict, Thomas, and of course, Ignatius. What sort of insight do these choices give us about the Pope and the changes that he plans?
Well, I think that the most important thing to see with these choices that the Holy Father has of his saints, all of them are men of prayer, and each of them in their own way are men of action. So I think that's very, very important. Ignatius obviously is someone that's very near and dear to our Holy Father because he is a member of the order that St. Ignatius founded, the Society of Jesus, the Jesuits. And Francis, of course, the name chosen by our Holy Father, Francis of Assisi, so that he can help rebuild the Church. Paul, that fearless preacher of the Word, someone who actually is a very practical preacher, as we see from his epistles in the New Testament. Benedict, of course, that the one who really always remind us about work and prayer, those two things that we have to keep in order. So I really think the Holy Father's choice of saints really puts things in perspective for us to understand him. And as we create a church that's pastoral, missionary, renewed, and really touched by grace.
Father, the Holy Father says he's going to do everything he can to change the Vatican from what he calls being self-centered to becoming more responsive to the larger world. Is he likely to encounter opposition from any factions inside the Roman Curia?
Well, to be honest, I really couldn't speak to that, not knowing the inner workings of the daily daily inner workings of the Roman Curia, being a doctoral student over here. But I would think within anything, people don't like change. I mean, and as we talk about change, realize the Pope is not going to throw down a revolution, if you will. He's really going to work within to reform the work that's already being done by the Curia. It's not in the sense of bringing forward the good things that the Curia is already doing for the good of the church and for the good of the world, and also really to help it update itself and perhaps become a little leaner in some of its management styles, and really to become less focused in on themselves in terms of the daily running of the Vatican, and much more focused in on the good of the church, the people of God.
Another thing I want to bring up with you while we have you here. In his September letter to Mr. Scalfari, Francis wrote that God's mercy is without limits, and as long as an individual does what is good, they could be saved. Now, in today's interview, they return to that theme. How does the Pope describe good, evil, and even salvation?
Well, I think the Pope is really looking ultimately into what we mean by what salvation of the individual soul. He's asking everyone to follow his or her own conscience, and he's really reflecting what the Church is saying with its great document, the Dogmatic Constitution of the Church in the Modern World from Vatican II, which we call Lumen Gentium, Light of the People. And really, in that sense, the Holy Father is asking us to really see that people of goodwill can of course be saved. He speaks about the idea of proselytism and that notion of how do we go forward, and we can't really hit people over the head with the faith. It has to be an open, honest dialogue with people that comes from a mutual respect. And so I think that's what he's trying to emphasize with his comments in this interview with Mr. Scalfaro.
Father, let's talk a little bit more about that. You brought up the proselytizing, which is the act of trying to convert someone to a particular religion. What exactly did he say about that?
Well, ultimately, he says it's coming to agape. It's coming to love. It's love for others, the Pope says, as the Lord preaches. It's not proselytizing, like really going out and shoving the faith into people's faces. It's showing them by example, knowing who and what we are, first and foremost, as Catholic Christians in the world today, and then showing that in love of neighbor. He says that we're called to be that yeast that serves the common good, to love our neighbor as ourselves. So the only correct way to love God, he says, is by loving our neighbor. In that sense, to go forward and really see that every single person is worthy of dialogue, worthy of respect, and to recognize the individual as who and what they are.
Well, Father, of course, we know today is a very big day. The Pontiff begins 3 days of consultations. He's got 8 cardinals that he's appointed for Vatican reforms. What will these 3 days entail, in your opinion, keeping in mind that these are private discussions, so of course you're not privy to anything that's happening? Any words so far, though, on what's going on?
Well, to be honest, I think there's a lot of excitement about these days here in Rome. I mean, this is something that's come out really from his discussion on the 13th of April this past year, that he's gathered these 8 cardinals really representing different areas around the world. And out of that, Cardinal Bertello, who is the governor of the Vatican City-State, is there, but we're also, the United States is represented, of course, by Cardinal O'Malley, and another English speaker in the group is George Cardinal Pell. So really, he wants to consult with these cardinals to see where is the church growing within these areas. They've given a task from the Holy Father to assist him in the governance of the universal church, and ultimately to draw up a project, a revision for a document that came out, Pastor Bonus. Pastor Bonus came out in 1988, and it was basically what the Roman Curia is, how the inner workings of the Vatican should go. So really, these cardinals are going to get together, and under the spirit, really, of Pope Francis in this 50th year of the celebration, the opening of Vatican II, under the spirit of St. Francis, whose feast we celebrate this week, they're going to get together, and they're going to see themselves as what they really are. They're an advisory committee. They're not really going to take over the church, if you will, in terms of that. They're more of an advisory committee for the church right now.
All right. Father Kush, thank you. I was actually going to ask you to make that distinction, that this is just consulting, that they're not part of the institution of the Roman Curia. So thank you so much for making that point. One other question I have for you is, we know the Holy Father does not do things arbitrarily. So we have the cardinals staying with the Pope at Santa Marta House, and they're traveling with him to Assisi on Friday. What, if anything, should we take away from these particular activities?
I think everything's got to be rooted in prayer and the example of our saints. Realize that the Holy Father is reminding us that we're part of a tradition that's lasted since the Lord Jesus, and that we're standing on the shoulders of the giants like St. Francis. So by bringing these men who really hold together so much of the church through their example, through their leadership, through their sacramental work, that these cardinals will go with the Holy Father. They will go to Assisi and they will pray with him, and they'll be in his presence. And I think the most important thing is the open, honest dialogue that will exist between the Holy Father and these cardinals.
All right, this is an exciting time for all of us, an exciting time for the church. I'm happy we were able to share some of that with you today. We certainly do miss you, but we're glad that you're available to us from Rome. We will be calling you often. I expect we'll be back in touch very soon, as a matter of fact. Thank you so much, Father Cush.
God bless you. Thanks again for having me.
Well, the Holy Father's Council of Cardinals and his newspaper interview are the top stories tonight, but the Pope isn't finished making news. We're now learning that he's had a guest at Santa Marta House, Rabbi Abraham Skorka from Argentina. We are told that this is the first time in the history of Christian-Jewish relations that a pope and a rabbi have celebrated their friendship by staying at the Vatican together. Over 4 days last week, they lived together, ate together, and even prayed together. 3 years ago, they wrote a book together. The rabbi says the Pope made sure his food was kosher, and he hopes they will travel together to the Holy Land next year. The rabbi believes that he and Francis are creating a dialogue that has not existed for centuries. And in fact, one of the foremost newspapers in the Jewish world, New York's legendary Jewish Daily Forward, is calling Francis the most Jewish pope we have ever encountered. A column by New Jersey Rabbi Jeffrey Salkin writes about Pope envy and thanks the Holy Father for being such a good teacher to the Jewish people. Currents correspondent Conrad Aderer is following these stories and now has a report on the Pope and the rabbi.
Close friendship between Pope Francis and Rabbi Skorka has been generating headlines, but is it truly a sign of increased dialogue between Catholics and Jews? I talked with clergy from both faiths for their thoughts. Interfaith dialogue was not a new thing for Rabbi Joseph Potasnik.
At this point, he was ill, suffering with Parkinson's, failing health, but yet he insisted on meeting Jewish leaders. So I was privileged. This Pope Francis, when he was in Argentina, had very close ties. As a matter of fact, there was a tragic bombing. Jews were killed, and he immediately went to the community, condemned the act, visited with synagogues, new members of the Jewish world, one-on-one. So it's nice to know that we have a friend in the Vatican who was a friend before he came to the Vatican.
As always, evidence of the closeness of Christian and Jewish traditions was within arm's reach.
These are the Ten Commandments in Hebrew. These are the verses from the Psalms written on the wall. You know, for us, the wall in Israel is a very, very sacred site. Look at the Bible. What's the first thing we read about? Story of Genesis, Adam and Eve. What does that say? You as a Catholic, I as a Jew, no matter what the other denominations are, we have a similar birth certificate. We're all descendants of Adam and Eve.
But I wanted to know what remained to accomplish in Catholic-Jewish relations. What would be the next things to work on, would you say?
I had this interesting discussion with Cardinal Dolan here in New York City. We spoke about common issues, common problems. For example, the rise of the unaffiliated. There are many people who are disconnected from church, synagogue, mosque. What are we doing about that? I think there's an opportunity here to look and to say, we suffer from some of the same problems. People want to know, why should I even go to church? Why should I go to the synagogue? What does religion have to do with my life? We have to respond to that.
I think if religious leaders are speaking with each other with mutual respect and the ability to recognize each other as valid approaches to God, I think that has a tremendous symbolic effect on people in the pews and people in the congregation. We are not out to force convert people. We are not out to make Christians of Jews. What we are out is to discuss with you and to walk with you and to be open to you. The Jewish idea of preparing the world for the coming of the Messiah and our belief in the doing of corporal works of mercy, because God has told us to do this, have a great area of discussion and bridges between both communities.
I always tell Jews, look sometimes at your neighbors, your Christian neighbors, see how they are, and you do the same thing in terms of standing up for what you believe is right. And then we come closer to each other when we recognize each other as equals.
Speaking to religious leaders right here in the city of New York offered a lot of inspiration, knowing that the friendship of Pope and Rabbi was being reflected everywhere. Reporting for Currents, this is Conrad Aderer.
A little bit more about the remarkable man who sits on the chair of St. Peter. World-famous Italian philosopher and best-selling author Umberto Eco says Pope Francis is special, a modern man who is a master of communications, calling him the Pope of the Internet. But Mr. Eco believes the Holy Father is more than another great communicator. He says, I am convinced that Pope Francis is representing something absolutely new in the history of the Church and perhaps in the history of the world. With everything that the Pope is doing and all that he has already done, it's worth remembering his pontificate is really only 6.5 months old. Yet the Holy Father's leadership of the Church is being felt in the pews of our churches and on the sidewalks of our city. Current's chief correspondent Bill Delano is here now with some responses to what Francis is asking of the faithful.
Pope Francis is challenging Catholics to build a better church based on love.
He's challenging every member of the church to look into our hearts and into our daily lives.
He says unemployed youths and forgotten elderly need the most.
So what were the big points covered in this recent interview?
Concern for the elderly and for the young, the fact that the elderly are many times left alone, they're lonely, and for the young that they are isolated even from one another. And of course the whole issue of joblessness for the young.
This Brooklyn teen agrees and says it's tough to be young today.
It's really frustrating because when you see now people, the rent is high and
I know, very high.
food and everything, and we really need a job because without a job we
Does it
can.
make you angry?
Yeah, sometimes.
And he talked about how joblessness was not just a political issue. How does it relate to the church?
Something like joblessness can be very, very demoralizing and dehumanizing, and therefore that needs to be addressed.
He used the words crushed by the present. Can you unpack that for me?
What he's saying is that we can get so taken up with the present moment that we forget that we have a history and we forget that we have a future.
So Pope Francis's words have certainly affected the Monsignor. Outside the church, I had a chance to catch up with his flock, and they told me they're tired of seeing churches here in Brooklyn being closed and feeling that the church is becoming a smaller and smaller place, and they're encouraged by what they're hearing from Pope Francis.
The messages that he's sending out I hope they will bring people to church, because the message that were before, they were like people not coming into church.
What's Pope Francis in your mind doing to make the church better?
I think he's opening up the church. I think he's welcoming people where other people might not have welcomed. I think he's a very welcoming Pope.
It's weird because he has turned an extrospective look on the church. It forces the worshiper to be introspective. Like, am I living out all of the things I'm praying and doing in there? Am I really being an example of Jesus Christ in other than showing up every Sunday and saying what I'm supposed to say? So I'd say he's making it easier and very interesting to be Catholic.
We need to bring people into the church, not make them not want to come to church. So you bring them into church, let them hear the word, and try and get them to stay. And if you relate to them in the everyday things that affect them, like being poor, not having enough food, immigration, things of that nature. I mean, abortion and all the other stuff, and same-sex marriage, those things are out there, but people have basic needs.
Well, I hope he's bringing somewhat of a more feeling back to the church. I mean, we're not all about business, and a lot of times things are about rules and business, and you have to follow certain rules, but sometimes you just got to really bring out Jesus' message, and I think that's what he's doing.
You think he brings you some hope?
Yes.
Yes. Oh yes, there's definitely hope.
So from a hopeful Brooklyn, for Currents, My name is Bill Delano.
Well, while the Pope sets the church on a course that gives hope to the poor, young, and elderly, he's also reforming the bureaucracy. Currents reported last night that changes at the Vatican Bank are receiving good reviews. Now comes word the bank is about to close out all accounts held by foreign embassies. Suspiciously large cash transactions by the missions of Iran, Iraq, and Indonesia are prompting the new crackdown. Meantime, in the Islamic war against Christianity, no new developments tonight in Malula, Syria. 40 nuns and orphans remain trapped in a convent by Al-Qaeda. Over in the Philippine city of Zamboanga, a soldier has been killed in mop-up operations after a terrorist rebellion to set up a hardline Islamic State was put down. And in Egypt, a Coptic bishop has survived an assassination attempt. Muslims wanted to kill him because they thought he was going to reopen a church closed for a decade. He had come to console the parents of a murdered Christian. And the leader of the Catholic Church in Nigeria is condemning the Al-Qaeda faction known as Boko Haram. Archbishop Ignatius Kaigama says their ferocity knows no limits. Over the weekend, the terrorists broke into a Nigerian agricultural college in the middle of the night and slaughtered 40 students as they slept in their beds. Catholic Charities USA reporting no immediate effect from the shutdown of the federal government. The faith-based social service provider is one of the largest in the nation. The politicians in Washington couldn't agree on how to spend the taxpayers' money last night, so parts of the government are closed today. The most noticeable impacts: parks and museums are closed, and sports matches involving military service academies are canceled. In Nice, France, a Catholic priest has blessed his congregation's mobile phones and tablets. Father Gil Florini says people think of the church as old-fashioned, but there's nothing wrong with being modern. The priest says blessing smartphones is a reminder to Christians that their mobile devices can be used to do good in the community. The priest used a limited amount of holy water to sprinkle the electronic gadgets. He placed them under the protection of the Archangel Gabriel, the patron saint of messengers. And finally tonight, Dr. Stephen Garner, the host of the popular net TV program Ask the Doctor, has taken the show on the road. Well, sort of. He and several colleagues came to the Church of the Virgin Mary in Park Slope, Brooklyn to host a health affair. Their ultimate goal? Saving lives. The turnout? Standing room only.
I just want to let you know we have free screenings for those of you who are interested. We're doing blood pressure screenings, blood sugar screenings. You can ask.
This is actually the 14th annual health fair that we're doing at Church of the Virgin Mary, and one of our doctors at New York Methodist Hospital, Dr. Emil Bakash, this is his parish and this is his congregation. Yeah, I've been doing this so far for 6 years, and every year it seems like the fair gets bigger and better attendance, so it's a good event that we're doing in the community.
Well, it's important to know that the community has doctors that are accessible, and that people who normally wouldn't go to a doctor, maybe they're uninsured, or maybe they're shy, or they're too busy. We're here. You know, since we're part of the community, it's important that they see us and we come to them.
I think, you know, being uninsured, you don't want to go to your doctor because it costs money, so you tend to avoid going. And problems can be treated much better when they're picked up early. It's when you let them go on for a few months that it becomes much harder to treat and also more expensive to treat. You're seeing that people want to take charge of their own health, the way we always talk about on the show and Ask the Doctor. And they come down here, and there is a link between religion and health because, you know, God gives us bodies and we have to take care of them. If we don't take care of them, we're not doing the right thing.
I think it has to start when you're a young kid. When your parents take you to the doctor, you get in the habit of going to the doctor on a regular scheduled basis, whether it's once a year for routine physicals, whether it's a job employment, but you should go on a regular basis.
Oh, most people want to know about what they read in the local press. They want to know about their cholesterol, their blood pressure. A lot of medical information that comes out day to day, including the Affordable Care Act, and they want to know about it, and physicians are the resource they have.
Yeah, I think a lot of screening that needs to be done to prevent diseases is not done quite as much as it needs to be done, and I think the more we get it out there and educate people about these things that need to be done, the more likely we can save lives, which is the point of us doing this.
Yeah, I worry about my health. I had some issue, you know, we have diabetes in the family, so I'm kind of concerned about it.
Listen to your body. And I'm a great one that always listens to my body, and I always know when something is wrong. And I really think there's a lot to be said about people that smile. I think they enjoy better health.
I take care of my health, and I go every year for checkup.
and make sure that everything is going right. And I try to exercise, I try to eat right, and I try to be active for my mind especially.
I came because to learn more about health. I see the program that ask the doctors, and I think it's great.
They see their community coming out, so they reinforce one another. I think the key thing is when your doctor tells you something, don't accept it at face value. Ask questions and go for second or third opinions.
And a quick reminder, right after we're done here, Dr. Gardner will follow us with a brand new episode of Ask the Doctor. So stay tuned, and thank you for joining us tonight. We leave you with more from the Ask the Doctor Health Fair. For the entire Currents News team, I'm Liz Faublas. Have a good night.